All right, so for the next assignment, lab assignment, what you're gonna be doing is creating a lip sync animation, basically utilizing what you've made up to this point, right? So you drew out a character, you rigged the character, and now you're going to animate the character. What I want to talk about is just basically pose design. Pose design, when we look at animation, if you remember from way back when, there's two main areas, right? There's time and pose, and you just put different poses over different spaces and time, and then you end up with motion. Okay. Out of those two things, pose design is actually the most important. It's how we reveal the character. Okay. So when the audience watches the film, they see the pose of the characters, right? And through that, they will see the emotion and they'll have appeal for it, and that tells the story, right? So basically, our the way that we communicate, just even you and I, right, besides auditory but through body language, is that you will see how I'm representing myself physically, and then you are able to get the idea of how I'm feeling on the inside, right? So a lot of what we try to do when we do animation is to give the impression that the external movements that we're producing have an internal motivation, and the best way to show that is through pose design. Okay. um so that's kind of what I'm saying here, is just make sure you have good poses. When you are doing creating your poses and stuff, you want to make sure you try and frame them as much as possible. So if you look at like Night Before Christmas, one of the probably the most famous sequence in it, you can see that every action here, every shot, Jack is basically framed. He's framed between these two posts, and then between these graves, and you can see he's framed inside of the moon here as well as here. Okay, so just make sure that your background is presenting your poses as best as they can. And you could look at any number of animations, traditional and otherwise, and you will see that they always try to frame the action. They'll make the surrounding area a little bit more busy, and then make more vague space be behind the characters so that they have room to act, and that you can see the poses clearly. Silhouette. So when you are creating your poses, make sure you have strong silhouettes that give an idea of what is happening. So, for example, if you were to look at Up, right, it's a great animated film. You get a real sense of direction whenever, is it Doug? Is that the dog's name? I can't remember now. Whenever he points in a direction, it forms a sort of triangle. Like they pose him in a way to make him look like he's looking to the left, and then to make him look like, or make him look to the right and then left. And then here is a great example of two plays with shapes. So if you look at here, this dog, right, is very pointed. It's a Doberman, right? And then he seems very up. And then as this shape pushes itself towards him, he becomes deflated, right? So you see a deflating of the overall shape. Line of action is the line that runs through the center of the body, generally speaking. So you want to make sure that you create contrast between them, and that they give a sense of motion and energy. So if you only saw, like, if I remove this character altogether and you only saw this line, and he says getting into trouble, blah blah blah, and then he goes like this, right? You can see how that line that gives that like, huh, me, and then he kind of retorts and pushes back, and then when he gets caught, it forms a sort of exclamation point, right? It becomes real erect and alert. You can have secondary accenting flow lines. So like this would be like the primary line of action. These are just the supporting ones. So typically you'll see that the limbs will help support the shape and direction of the pose, often mimicking it. So you can see like right here, right, that these main lines are coming down, and then this one's coming up. So it creates a real vertical sense. But then when this is more compressed, so are also the accent lines. Another line that can be created is just through eye lines. It helps people will look to see where characters are looking, and then look in the same direction, right? That's how we do point of view shots. We'll show a character looking at something, then we'll cut to whatever they're looking at, and then we'll cut back and show a reaction, right? And we automatically assume that where they're, when you look off, that's what they're looking at. So right here is a really good interplay. You can see he's looking at her. He also has this spoon to help direct that line, but he's looking at her, then she's looking down at the soup, and then his arm also kind of helps form up here. So you get this good triangle motion, looking person to person and down and up. And right here, again, he's sort of the centralized figure. she's looking at him, he's looking at her, and then she's also looking back up at him. Again, kind of creates a triangle. Same thing generally here. Again, we get this same sort of triangle. And this is really small, but if you were to look at the shot, you'll see that these guys are looking over here. He's looking down at them, and then they're looking over here. And so again, we create this movement, this circular motion that helps move the person's eye through the composition. I already mentioned this earlier, but it's good to contrast your poses. So particularly if you're trying to create like some sort of strong motion, so you can see when they're doing this dance, right? You can see the general line of actions going this way, but then they sway the opposite. And the same thing with her, she's swaying this way, and then she sways that way. You do have to be careful about doing too much. So Don Bluth, who's like a really famous, I think he originally did work actually at Disney, but he ended up doing a lot of other of the animated films you'll see that were like Warner Brothers stuff, like The Secret of NIMH or Land Before Time. I'm trying to think of some other ones. He did All Dogs Go to Heaven. He did a whole bunch of them. But he's kind of outside of Disney, like he was kind of like the go-to guy. But what you'll notice that when he sees animations, particularly like his dialogue and stuff, like the mouth motions are way too large because everything is big, nothing feels big. Straight and curved poses are kind of where I talked about this earlier, but you can kind of see the good contrast of this generally really strong line that's running through him, and then see how it turns into an exclamation point when he suddenly becomes startled. What you'll see is that the more angled something is, like if it's flat, do I talk about this later? I might talk about it later, but if a line is flat, that means it's passive, right? So think about like if you're sleeping or the horizon line, it feels very still. When lines are vertical, it gives a sense of alertness. Like you're like a question mark, like not a question mark, like an exclamation point, very like looking up, aware. And things that are diagonal are the most action. They give a sense of direction. They can be threatening. It'll feel more dynamic. Sometimes they'll even do with a camera angle where they'll do a canted angle or a Dutch angle, and that will make the sequence feel much more. Usually creates an unease as well, but it'll make it much more of a dynamic shot. Simple versus complex. When you do your poses, it's a good idea to have one side be simple, a simple shape, and then the other side be more complex. So you can see it's more complex on this inside and less so on the outside, and that creates more texture on the inside, and it helps kind of move your eye to the center of this. And just in general, when you do your poses, you'll see that usually one side will be relaxed and the other side will be kind of compressed. Good example of this is like contrapposta, if you've ever taken like art history. If you look at like David, the sculpture, he like holds the stone and his arm up, and he's got his hip bent, and one side of his body is kind of complex, and then his other side is limp. It's more simple, okay? You can, through that line of action, you can create a sense of weight. If you keep it just straight vertical, it works for alertness, but generally speaking, try to have a little bit of weight to it by shifting the line back and forth and around. It gives a sense of weight, because we're trying to, imitate life to some extent. Sometimes we're trying to go even beyond it. When you are creating responses to a stimulus, right? Because that's one of the things that makes us alive. It's a good idea to show a difference of how different characters. So, like in Incredibles, here you'll see that that big robot thing is here. The way that each one of them are reacting a little bit different. He seems a little bit more fearful, while he is thinking more aggressively, right? He's looking like he's going forward. So, not all characters should react the same way to the same thing that's happening to them.